It's a pleasure to be here today. I'll be talking about dynamic component architecture using reusable tables. Just to check, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see.
Yes. Okay. I'll be talking about dynamic component architecture using reusable tables. But before I go on, my name is Oyemade Oyemaja. I'm a Nigerian. I'm a web enthusiast. I'm curious about building for the web. I currently work as a lead front-end architect in Global Accelerates, which is a fintech in Nigeria using Angular. So that's my GitHub profile, my email address in case anyone wants to reach out to me. But before I go any further, I'd like to say a big thank you to Bonnie Brennan for sharing her Dynamic Forms project with us in her Angular architecture in an Angular Nation. It's a major source of inspiration behind this. If you haven't seen it, you can check it out on the Angular Nation activity feed or on a GitHub repo. It's a fun project. I really had fun going through it. Bonnie Brennan is an Angular GDE and the founder of Angular Nation, which is a free private network created for Angular developers to network, collaborate, and ask questions. But simply put, the Dynamics Form project is a project that dynamically generates forms based on imputed values, thereby reducing boilerplate across the application. So what I think I found intriguing the most about that project was that just having to take away all of that code, all of that HTML markup in various components to just create the same thing where you are repeating yourself over and over and again. Just taking that away and having a way to just modularize it, I think was a whole nother level outside what I had seen before. So I was really fascinated about it. So after going through Bonnie's presentation, I could really understand the usefulness of such dynamic functionality. Apart from the fact that it significantly reduced the code size, the thought of being able to modularize forms into a component that could cater for most of my organization's use cases was really intriguing to me. And I already worked on a custom version that could meet my organization's needs. So basically, for most of the forms of my organization that are kind of in the same category, we use dynamic forms to actually render them. So it's easier for our developers to work and speed up development and everything as such. Yeah, so when I was done implementing the custom form, I saw an opportunity to also use this strategy to modularize other components in our organization. For example, our tables. I noticed that for every table we created, it was the same markup. You literally had to just go and copy and paste the previously created one, and then just passing the different data into the table, and then you had the same thing. And I saw this in like close to 30 to 35 components, and I felt, well, this is another place where this strategy could be used. So the fact that it was modular, you could write less code and cater for custom use cases, I think was something I found really, really interesting about that. Okay, one more thing. It's also important to note that the main point I'm trying to pass here is the thought behind the process. What I created was tailored to fit my organization's use case. So you might need to, work on it a little bit to be able to find your own bearing for your own use case. But the thought behind the process is what I'm trying to say. The fact that you can actually write better code, more modular code, dry code that, in which you're not repeating yourself over and over and over again. I think, yeah, it's actually something to be fascinated about. So the demo, yeah, well, I will show you the presentation of how I was able to get this done. But before I do that, I'll just walk you through what the demo is going to be, the sections in which the demo is going to be broken into. So I'll start by showing previous implementations of the table, how we used to write it previously with the markup and everything, and the various use cases and edge cases surrounding them. And then I'll show a dynamic implementation and how I was able to get it done. So let me just come here and show you the project. I'm serving it already. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So this is just a sandbox project in which where I do all my development work, basic Angular application, nothing special about it. It's in version 11. And I have a lazily loaded module here called dynamic table, where I have everything concerning the dynamic table. So let me show you what it looks like. So basically, this is the static table. There's nothing fancy here, just a table, th tag, t-body, t-body, and a button here, which is most of what, this is what most of our tables look like. And I have another one here without the button, just to show you what it looks like. So this was standard. This is what we had in like 30 components, and then this is what the code would look like. So you will have, as usual, table tag, your t-head and your t-body, and then you pass in the data into it, and this is what the data usually look like. Most of the time it will come from the API, but I just have static data here to be able to show my proof of concept. And then for the button here, you will just attach a function to a click event and then fire that whenever. So yeah, pretty standard stuff. And I know this looks really neat here because it's just a small table. We had tables that had as much as 5, 6, 7, 10 columns, and the markup would significantly be increased. And I imagine having this sort of thing in like 30 to 40 components. It didn't really look that bad, but from the big picture, I felt we could do something better about it. So this is what it will look like. Yeah. So yeah. Let me now show you a link to the dynamic project. So basically, we have the same table here. It's even better formatting. I'll show you how we're able to get that done. And still the same thing. And even though the output is the same, the intriguing part will probably be what the HTML file looks like. And this is it. So compared to this, you can see that we were able to actually clean up the component. And not as if there's anything wrong with writing code like this. No, if you have one table, two tables, you probably do not need that. But imagine having 30 of this replaced with something like this. You can see that you are significantly reducing code size overall. And then in terms of reusability, it's pitch perfect, if you ask me. No one is having a different kind of design compared to another developer in your company. If you have a design system, you can be sure that everything will be the same thing throughout. So now let's get into how we're able to get this done. So this is how the table is being used. You have a table component, HTML file, and then you have a TS file. Yeah. So for each table we are trying to generate, we are passing in the title, which we have there. Then we are passing in the data itself, which is like an array of customers. So their name, emails, phone number, loyalty, and total amount spent. Standard stuff. And then the interesting part about this is that for you to be able to, modularize something like a table, you need to be able to pass in key value pairs to be able to let the table identify what value to look on your data and what the header is going to look like. Those are the key things that had to be done there. So we have a table setting where you just say, okay, for the first column, look for the key name in the data, and the header should be full name. So it will go to the first column and say, for every data I'm showing on this TH here, I'm looking for the property name, assign the value to this, and then the header should be full name. So we have that for every other That's how it works for every other column. And then there's a special use case that we also have to think about. So not all the values on your table is exactly the way you want from the API. Sometimes you might want to transform your date using pipes. Sometimes you might want to use a currency pipe, depending on what case it was. So we also have to cater and factor that in. So with that, we're able to create a scenario where you will pass in a format for a pipe, and then it will generate that pipe and format your value for you. So if you look at the primary key total spent here now, you'll see that total spent is a number, but we are still able to convert it into a currency using the currency pipe. Fascinating stuff. And the last thing, so also worthy of taking note here is the buttons. So you can see in this table here, we don't have buttons. So there's no need to worry about that. It caters for that. But then in a scenario where you want to put a button, either 1 or 2 or 3, depending on what your use case might be, you also have to like pass in a button settings to be able to configure that part. And this is what it looks like. So you pass in your button title, which is what is represented here on the button. Parameters. So this part is where you are saying, okay, for every function that I want that button to fire, these are a couple of dependency parameters that I need to be able to get the function to fire the way I want it to work. So you probably have some logic inside your function. So for example, here I have an alert here. So I'm saying, okay, these are the key values from the data on the table that I want to have access to fire that function for that particular table. So here you see that for each guy, for each row we have here, if you click on open, the function fires and is able to work with the data that is for that particular row here. So after looking at that, I want us to now go through how we're able to implement this, this sort of thing. So the main component itself. Yes, so this is what we have here. I think I should open the model so that you can actually be able to follow through and understand what each guy is looking for. Before we go there, okay. So for this component app dash dynamic table, we require a couple of inputs like we mentioned before, the title, which is what we are displaying up here. We also require the record itself, so the data you want to display on the table, so that we can have access to that, which is what was imputed. Then the settings I mentioned earlier, which is of type column settings. And if I come here and show you column settings, this is what we have here. We are expecting a primary key that represents the key that we are going to use to map your record to that particular column. The header, which is the TH here. So these are the headers here for that particular column. And then whether or not you want to format the data. Do you want to add a pipe format on that data? Whether or not you want to, it's not compulsory, but we have made our functionality for that. And then we also expect the buttons, like I mentioned earlier. We have the button settings. This is what it looks like. We're expecting a title. We're expecting a function that you want to fire when the button is clicked. And I added a class here just in case you probably wanted to add CSS classes to the button to make it look differently. It's not compulsory though. And then parameters, like I mentioned, for that function that you are trying to fire. So in this component, we take in these imputed values, and on init, we run some computations. The first thing we do is we check if you passed in button settings. So you passed in data to add buttons to your table. If not, we set it to an empty array. So another special use case, which was just for my organization, was that anytime you had multiple buttons, the text here was probably going to be represent plural because it's more than one. So actions. But if you have one button, action. So that's what this does. So based on whether or not you passed in settings now, we just wanted to have a scenario where peradventure you probably forgot to pass in settings, or you just wanted a quick table, you didn't want to do too much work. We could still generate this kind of column settings based on the data you passed in. So what do I mean here? If you did not pass in settings, we would map the keys. So we take the data you passed in, and we use object.keys to change the keys into an array of values, and then we generate the key and then the header. So basically what just does is that it changes camel case to uppercase, camel case to like normal text, so you have full name, and then it will remove the space, the capital letters, and change them to a space, and change it to a space, and properly capitalize your text. So that's what this just does. So basically we're saying in this onInit function here, if there are no buttons, set it to an empty array, we set the text, and then we create a default column map based on whether or not you passed in settings. So in the HTML here, we are looping through the settings that we created, which is of this type here. And we are saying, okay, for each table head, we want you to set the header as a text in that table head. So you see that for everybody here, we were able to now set full name, email, phone number based on what was passed in. Then we check, okay, for the button length that I talked about before, should it be action, should it be action based on the length of the buttons, and then we determine what to show there. Then for the body of the table, we loop through each individual record. So for each individual row here, we have access to the data for that particular customer. And then we say, and then for each individual table column, so we've looped through each individual record here to have all 5 of them. So for each column, we loop through our column maps, which is this. And then we set the record to the map of primary key. So what this means is that for a customer, Faith Joy, we loop through Faith Joy, and then after looping through Faith Joy, we now loop through the column settings and then set each individual column to the primary key. So for example, for the data Faith Joy, for the name, we want to say this is the name here. Primary key is the first name, so it's the name for full name, and then each individual column respectively to be able to set these guys here. Just in case there are any questions, you can just pop in and ask so that I'm sure I'm carrying everybody along. So back to it. Are there any questions? Hello?
If you have any question, you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, then I guess
Yeah, just go on.
So basically, we look through the data and we're able to set the value we want to set for each table. And that is how we're able to create each individual table based on the TD here. So another part of it that was actually interesting was being able to dynamically fire functions on the buttons based on what you passed in. It was a very tricky one to implement, but with the help of some people, I was able to get it done. And what we did was that, first things first, we check whether or not to show a particular TD, whether or not to show a button in there. So based on the length of whether or not you passed in buttons, we show and hide this particular markup. And then we loop through them just in case you have multiple ones. And then what we do is that we fire a function, and that function is, this is it here. This is the function here. And we say, we pass in the record into that function. We pass in the particular function called the function you're trying to fire. and then values that are needed to fire that function. So if you remember clearly, let me open an example here. In our tables here, we had to pass in, for our buttons, we passed in a couple of parameters that are going to be needed to fire this our function here. So the way it works is that for every parameter you need, you have to add them into an array, firstly, and then also expect them in this function here. So for this function, you're saying, okay, these are the values that I need to fire that function. So what we are now doing here is that we are taking those values and then we are mapping them to the record to be able to get the actual values. So these are the keys for the values that we need. And now that we have them here, we are using those keys to get the values from the record. That is how we are now able to have all of those values. We are spreading them here to be able to create a separate array that can be used by this function here. So after we're able to get this done, most of the major functionality was actually almost over, and we're able to now create this. But another thing that came up was the pipes part, in which I mentioned. We wanted to be able to format special values based on pipes. And to achieve that, what we did was that we created the format cell pipe. So basically, this is a pipe named format cell, and it takes in an argument. And this is what it looks like. So for each value we get here, based on the format you pass in, we determine what kind of pipe to put on it. So if you look at here, we have something called, let me open the value so that I can see a sample. So for this table setting for customer, we say we want a pipe format of currency. We have a model here that is an enum that we use to map through each individual pipes that we have created so that you can specify the one you want. And it says it wants a pipe of currency, and we know that enum values return numbers. So based on the value that is passed here, pipe format of currency, which is going to be like 0, 1, 2. In our case here, it is currency. So it's going to be 1. So, but based on whatever format it is, we are able to do some computation on each of the data. So for example, in this case here, if the format is 1, we want you to transform the particular value. We have access to the value because we are using a pipe here. So in this case, it will be 400, and we're saying transform it to a currency pipe, and then we return this to currency pipe to transform, and then we transform it automatically for us based on the argument that we passed into the pipe. So we're able to use this to format for dates, for percentage, and this was just a use case where, in case the backend was returning either an array or an object as a value, we would format it based on what we want and let it show as strings. So which is why we have defaults here, because we have cases like that in our organization. That was how we were able to sort out the pipe values. Then another thing that came up was, if you take notes, you can see that for loyalty, we are showing yes or no, right? But on our data, what we're actually getting is true or false. This was another edge case that we had to look into and see how to get to work. We thought the best way to achieve this was to use directives, and it might not necessarily be the best way, but at least this was the way we were able to find out to get it done, and it worked for us. So we created a directive called style cell directive. So we're saying basically for that particular cell, we want to style it. And for that directive, we're having access to the key and the value of that particular record we are looking through. So if you look at it here, so we have access to the key, I have access to the value here. And based on those inputs, we were able to do some form of formatting that we wanted. So we said if the key is loyalty reward, we know anywhere on any table where we have a key of loyalty reward, we want to be able to transform our true or false to values that users can relate to. Yes, is he a loyal customer? No, is he not a loyal customer? So you could see how this could actually come in hand and, you know, account for various use cases that we had in different places. So we're able to use renderer to be able to format based on the value we add. So if it's true, we change the text to yes, and then we add a color of green. If it's false, we change it to no, and we add a color of gold to it. And that was how we were able to get this pattern. So yeah, I think those are how we're able to achieve a dynamic component to render tables. Since the last time we worked on this, we've also gone out to implement this dynamic component architecture on other parts of our design, because the way we work is that we have a design system that is used to build majority of our products, because we have about 8 different enterprise products that we work on in my team. And we wanted to have a scenario where if someone has done a particular job, there's no need for another person to keep repeating and repeating, even if it was just copy and pasting across board. We wanted to have like a standard where we say, okay, this is a component, you just pass in the values based on the edge case that you have, and it returns whatever you want for you. So we were able to implement this on our forms based on what Bonnie created, tables based on this, modals, charts, pagination components. I think we also did that on our filters for our tables too. And it has really been, we've seen a really good increase in development time and turnaround time for project completion. So yeah, that is it for the code. If anyone has any questions, let me know. And I want to say thank you for listening. And if anyone has any questions, they should let me know. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Oye. Anyone else who has a question could just unmute themselves and ask.
For me, I'll just say bravo. By the way, I've just been trying to look for a way to shorten the code and shorten development time, but this is amazing. I think we've been too lazy to think about how to shorten this process. So bravo to you.
And the beautiful thing about it is that when trying to do things like this, at the starting point, you have like stumbling blocks and you feel like there's no way. But by the time you look into it deeply, you are able to get more functionality from Angular, you know, look into different concepts that you probably did not have use for because of just writing things the normal way. And it definitely broadens, you know, your horizon and how well you understand how Angular works. So it's a win-win if you look at it. Win-win.
Yeah, it is, because I was working on a project recently and I kept copy pasting code all over the place, same code, and it was getting to a point it's quite annoying, especially when you're not even using your brain to come up with something new. You know, this mundane work is too much sometimes. I would wish someone could just be able to download something from the NPM packages and just plug in and move on. So
It's kind of
I'd
like
say,
your own material components. It's not as high level as theirs, but in-house kind of thing where you're creating your own modules to be able to deliver work done. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I was also fascinated when I came about it. I think I mentioned that I got it from Angular, my Angular architect training on Angular Nation, and I was fascinated. And we've seen drastic improvements, you know, in the length of code and how long it even takes to write code. Because if someone has created a dynamic table like this, all you just have to do is change the data, and you get your table. Like that's literally it. So yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm also actually even thinking at the component level, because you see, most of the tables, you'd find a situation where you're having a list of, let's say, contacts, list of employees, list of, and the pages don't change.
Yes.
So you can actually even go to another level of saying, can you be able to create dynamic components where you're able to just pass all this data in and don't need to actually think so much about it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I think my question would be for so for someone who is a beginner, right? Would you advise them to always think about the dry principle, or when should they exactly start saying like, hey, I should actually start thinking of how can I reuse my components, or how can I reuse some parts of this code like a table?
So funny enough, I can actually relate to the question you asked, because when we decided to start doing this organization, there was a question that came up, and it was, are you sure you are not overcomplicating things? Are you sure you are not making it harder for someone new to be onboarded, to make it harder for onboarding new developers onto your project? And the thing about it is, you have to find like a halfway point, because obviously this particular code is not a beginner's code, right? Right. But one thing I know that helped me transition from writing it the non-dry way, where you're copy and pasting, and being able to confidently say, okay, I want to take this and make it dynamic, was the confidence I had in, well, the code I write, one, and the people I had access to. So I knew, worst case scenario, if I hit a brick wall and I couldn't get it done, I had access to experts who could just show me, oh, this is what you're doing wrong here. You should probably have done it this way and do it this way. And that was where Angular Nation came in for me. I had access to people like Sander Elias, Bonnie Brennan, a host of other GDEs. And the thing about it is, not everyone has access to those people, but I think the Angular Nation community makes it really easy for you to have access to those people. And that way you can start building on your confidence. So for example, now I have created this and I have access to those people. If a new person is coming on board and wants to work on this, I can then pass that knowledge that I have learned to him, and it's definitely going to fast track his growth overall. And I think that is the best way to look at it on the long run. You are saving development time. Your beginner developers are learning faster and learning at a pace that is it's not the usual pace. Things have gotten better. So I think, yeah, it's the best way to go about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have something to add, because we already have experience with this approach. And we have a big component, in fact, it's super huge, because with the time we supported more features and more functions, filter options, a lot of things in the library we have now. And with some dynamic components, some dynamic controls too for the filters. And it grows so big that it is now difficult for onboarding, because it's super complex. It's a monolith, and we don't have a way to clean it up, because it's already a monster. So you have to be careful on applying some good patterns, good design approach in the components you use, because that will have consequence in the future. And that's why we now have a second library for a more dynamic approach with a more generic solution, because the first library we have is now difficult, and the choices we made are heavy now. Like, it's like technical debt.
Yeah.
Like, at the time you
So,
get the
I actually understand what you're talking about. So there's a general, saying too much of everything is bad, right? There also has to be boundaries to how far you can actually push these things. So, for example, in the use case I mentioned, if we had 5 tables, 6 tables with different kind of features, it probably wouldn't make any sense to do that because are going to spend definitely a lot of time trying to build this kind of thing, one. And two, by the time you are done building that particular thing, you probably use half of the time spent on creating the dynamic component to just get your tasks done and get it done. But the thing about it is you also have to look at it from an angle where for you to say you want to create a dynamic component for something, you know that the creation of that thing is going to outweigh using it the normal way. So you have a dynamic component, you have a choice to create a dynamic component and reuse it, and then you have a choice to just write it the normal way with the normal HTML markup. But one thing you also have to take note is that as tech, as a company, as applications grow, features tend to come in, and you want to make sure it's not overly complex. Because I've also had issues where we reach a breaking point and we're like, okay, we could probably step forward and start, working on change detection by ourselves. But then we look at it again and say, okay, are we going too far? So what we try to do is that we try to group. So it's like factorizing things that are similar to a particular point and not making sure that it's a one box that fits everything. No, we try to say, okay, this particular part, this one and this one, they can easily be computed into something that can cater for everything. But once you start having complex use cases, it just becomes a whole, like it looks as if you are backing yourself into a corner and it's something you probably want to avoid. So this kind of concept is something you probably want to also be sure of before you just work on. And I totally understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, just be careful because you know that with the time, all your choices and all the code have a price.
Yes.
Anyone else was a question or a comment? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes, mine is just a comment. I think it's a wonderful job and to think of building dynamic components. And given that this has given me an idea of some project actually I was supposed to start this night, and it has a lot of displays which load lots and lots of data and displayed in tables. It has given me ideas on how I can tackle some of that stuff by building dynamic tables. And I think as Matteo highlighted, there is always that danger of things turning out to be over complex. So I don't know, it also takes experience to get to a point of where you realize things are getting a bit complex. It's time to step back. So yeah, and I think I saw like on your on your VS Code, I could see something for NX monorepos. Yes, maybe there's somebody who mentioned about NPM modules. Maybe you could just probably highlight a little bit how you could throw that into a lib in the NX monorepo so that somebody can be able to reuse it in multiple apps without necessarily relying on an NPM module.
So the sad part is that this particular project is not really NX. It's not an NX workspace. So and that might take a lot of time to. But I think I could run through how that would actually work. So I think the first question is everybody here familiar with how NX works? That's the first question. Does anybody here have experience with NX using the NX workspace and stuff, monorepo workspace. Anyways, let me just give a high-level picture of how it works. So, in my company, we actually do not use we don't use NX. We actually use. So what we did is that we created a shared folder of shared modules. So we have a shared folder where we have shared modules. So for each module, you have a module related to everything dynamic table. You have a module related to anything dynamic forms. You have modules for charts and stuff like that. And then we reuse that across our application. Obviously, if you want to now start saying you want to use it across different applications, you have to start looking at things like Bit. So Bit is actually a platform that helps you reuse your code. If you probably don't want to go through the monolith conventional step, you can actually use things like Bit or NPM to actually now make that library accessible across different applications. But one thing to be careful of is so if you are using a code repository, if you are using something like Bitbucket, I think Bitbucket also has a way to help you turn some particular repositories into libraries that can be installed by other applications. There's also a feature like that on Bitbucket. So there are a host of ways you could actually go around sharing that kind of, but because the main point is that if you have created it on this particular project, you don't want to have to create it for each application you create. You want to make sure it's widely accessible and can be used across the board. One thing you should also be careful of is how people have access to it too, so that I don't have a junior developer that just goes in and tweaks something and then everything is down. But I think there are solutions in place to make sure that things like that don't happen. So yeah, does that answer your question? Hello?
Yeah. It's all right. It's all right. That's okay.
I think Matteo had his hand up. Yeah, Matteo.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, despite this solution is not always like 100% clean and can get complex with time. All in for the dynamic stuff, because with the time we improve the technique and we improve the approach. We get better with some design patterns, some clear code, and we can save a lot of time with this kind of core components, dynamic components, instead like doing it again and again, right, in our websites.
Yes.
Okay, anyone else? That's a question.
I think I'll just
for me, it's
sorry.
just to probably add to what these guys are saying. At the end of the day, we all come across this situation. So for me, I believe that if you're able to get learning experiences from projects you have done before, like after a project, you're able to do a review of what took the longest time coding and why it took so long. For me, I've looked at this as an opportunity where if you have some free time, which hardly comes, but if you're able to do it, then try and see how you can be able to solve such these mundane tasks to speed up development and share. Because at the end of the day, we'll all have to come across such situations, and if we all work together, we'll be able to shorten our development experience.
Yeah, I think actually that's a very good point, because I've been in situations whereby I really got so frustrated with implementing a certain feature, or I don't know, just populating a certain component, And then I found a way to do it that probably I did not even know about it. But then probably writing up a very simple blog post on like how you resolve this particular issue can really help a lot. Because like for example, I was just building a side project I was working on, and it was just a simple weather app. And I had this issue whereby I have to share. So first of all, one API takes up it takes the city as the input, and then it gives you the longitude and the latitude coordinates. And what I had to do, because I did not find an API that has everything in one place, I have to now take that take those latitude and longitude coordinates and then send it over to another API, and then now give me my weather forecast. And I was really trying to find out how can I even do this. Then I found out like very simple blog post that they had a similar issue, because with each and every API, of course, you have authorization headers, you have API keys you need to send. So there's a way you need to condition, first of all, if it's this particular API that you're calling, it needs to be you need to make sure that you only call it to the right input. So yeah, I think it's very, very important that if people have probably met some hit probably a rocky place and they found a way around it, to be also good to just share. Even if it could be just a very simple video on how to do it, can really, really go a long way. Yeah. Thank you for that, Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Oye, thanks very much. I joined 20 minutes ago, and I would like to know if this recorded session will be available in the future.
Oh yes. So it will be available by tomorrow, 2 p.m. East African time. So that should be around 11 a.m. GMT. Yeah.
It will be available on YouTube, right?
Yes, YouTube. Just search for Angular Kenya.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Big up to you.
Yeah, thank you. So like I just want to stress another point. Like I said, so creating dynamic components like this, in all honesty, is not always going to be so easy. I mean, you might actually get to points where even if it's the most basic of functionalities, and you're trying to just cater for little use cases between them, you hit roadblocks, and you feel like you backed yourself into a corner and said, you know, what was the point in me even trying to do this? But like I said, having access to experts, you know, people who you can call and you know that they've been in Angular for a very long time and they understand the whole inner workings, can actually be an added advantage, in all honesty. And then you see that things just work well overall. So yeah, that is also something to take account of. Yeah.
All right. Please, can I pass a comment?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically, join Angular Nation, right?
No, it's not necessarily Angular Nation. I mean,
the community.
That was what
get it.
That was what worked for me.
Yeah. That's cool. All right. So what I would like to say is, I feel like if you feel there is a need for you to create dynamic components, I mean, just go ahead and do it. If you feel, so far as you feel like there's a need for that, just go ahead and do it. I don't think the stumbling block is not worth it. I mean, it will help you in your experience with development in general. For me, I've tried several times. I've tried with tables and all. I've hit stumbling blocks, but then I move on, and then so at every time that I hit that stumbling block, I gain an experience, read a lot of blogs, and then it helps me move forward. So no matter what, just don't fear. Don't make it look like you might not need it. So far as you've thought of it, I think it's the right thing, personally anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no question or any comment, I'd like to say a big thank you to Oye for taking his time and taking us through dynamic architecture. I know it's something that is always out there, especially with the recruiters or just companies in general. They always want to see your code, like how do you structure your code? How do you share components across different modules and all that? So being given also this kind of this level of simple management of things like tables makes it even more interesting. Like I've actually learned a ton of things, especially with the formatting of some of the things over here, like using a pipe. It's really, really interesting. And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And as usual, the session or the recording of this session is going to be available on YouTube by tomorrow in the afternoon, Kenyan time. And do reach out to us if you have anything probably you would like to have further clarification on. And I think we'll have probably a link to the repo shared to us. Oh yeah, is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So we'll definitely have it all in the description. Yeah.
So thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, it was a pleasure being here. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. And thank you guys for joining us. And yeah, please do join us again next week because we have another session. And of course, to get further updates, follow Angular Kenya on Twitter. And also, just subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content. Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And for those who are night, good evening.